Hey, before we get started, I wanted to give a little shout out to BJ and Rezvani for helping with some of the technical issues we had on this one. So thanks so much for your help and for making this episode possible. All right, Brian, take it away.
I'm Brian Foster, and this is the Grindhouse Institute. On each episode of this podcast, Jeremy Floyd and I program a triple feature movie night. Each of the movies share common themes, and we discuss them here. We're happy you could join us for today's block we call Gothic Ghost Stories. We're diving into Gothic horror today and taking a look at what makes this genre unique. Influenced by 19th century stories such as Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Bram Stoker's Dracula, Gothic films are infused with a dark, foreboding tone as well as elements of the supernatural. Today's block includes 3 film adaptations of novels that fall squarely in the Gothic horror genre. Each is thematically synonymous with this type of film, main characters leaving their old lives to start something new, embarking on a new pursuit that brings them to a threatening place filled with old secrets and age-old horror. A young woman accepts the job as governess to 2 orphans, packing up her things and moving into the beautiful Victorian Bly Manor. All is well until the governess starts to see visions of strange figures on the manor grounds and starts to suspect the children may be possessed by ghosts trapped within Bly. Shot incredibly by Freddie Francis, directed by Jack Clayton, co-written by William Archibald and Truman Capote, this film is not one to miss, The Innocents from 1961. Hill House is a place that no one will visit in the night, in the dark. Created completely with wrong angles, the dark history of the house is explored when a group of strangers are brought together by a parapsychologist to determine whether or not proof of the afterlife exists. Upon arriving, strange things begin to happen, and one person in the group starts to believe that the house is speaking to her and won't let her leave. Based on the 1959 Shirley Jackson novel, Robert Wise directs this incredibly frightening film that really holds up today. Add in a young Russ Tamblyn, and you've got 1963's The Haunting. Red Rum! After taking a job as the caretaker of the Overlook Hotel, Jack Torrance, his wife Wendy, and son Danny embark on the next chapter of their lives. A little peace and quiet are just what this writer and his family need. That and a hotel full of evil ghosts that methodically take over Jack's mind. Stanley Kubrick notoriously directed the absolute hell out of the stars of this film, who all deliver incredible, off-kilter performances that really nail the horror from the opening credits of the film to the very final shot. Based on Stephen King's novel of the same name, The Shining, from 1980. Thank you for listening to the Grindhouse Institute. Please enjoy.
Are you Dudley the caretaker?
Yeah, I'm Dudley, the caretaker.
Mr. Grady, you were the caretaker here.
I'm sorry to differ with you, sir, but you are the caretaker. You've always been the caretaker.
All right, welcome back to the Grindhouse Institute. I am Brian Foster. Here with me, as always, is Jeremy Floyd. Hello, and how are you?
Hi, how's it going?
It's going great. I've been busy working as a governess for this little family. These kids, they're just awful. I can't stand them. I don't know what's wrong with them. Other than that, things are good.
Yeah. And it seems like you've been here before, or maybe you've always been
Something
here.
Something uncanny, really.
Yeah.
The repetition.
So as you've now guessed, we are watching Gothic horror films. It's a very special episode today, and we have a very special guest. Jeremy, would you like to do the intro?
Yeah, wanted to find a way to do a little collab for a while now, but I had a great film block suggested by, my former film professor and now full-time film critic, Eileen Jones.
Hi, pleasure to be here.
Thanks for joining us.
So glad.
And a big fan of the genre films.
The genre in general, yes, but I have favorites within, and Gothic horror is definitely one.
Well, and you put this together, so why these 3 films?
It's started just from a personal preference. They were my 3 favorites of this type of film, which I also just sometimes call the ghost film, which isn't a super popular choice among contemporary people who love horror. I think it's started becoming kind of regarded as an old-fashioned genre. I mean, it's not like you don't get paranormal activity in The Conjuring and stuff.
Right.
But they tend to be a lot more visceral, a lot more bodily, a lot with more, I don't know, blood and more tactile horror than this kind of Gothic version, which is very atmospheric, very psychological, and more subtle in its effects.
And I thought it was incredibly effective. Mostly the silence and then the loud roars that would come out of nowhere, and there was no one there or there was someone there, and they did a great job of that.
And the sort of strange sexual tension in a lot of this, and like the way that the main characters in each of these have, something that's not quite right about them, and it's shown by just like little things that they do, not even the giant things like Jack Nicholson coming after him with an axe, but like just how he spent his Thursday or whatever it was, just kind of staring into the void, how people interact with the governess and the innocents, and then what was her name, Theo in The Haunting,
Or Eleanor.
Eleanor?
Well, there's Eleanor and Theo in The Haunting.
Theo was the psychic, and Eleanor was
sorry, all right, sorry, yes, got it.
Yeah,
exactly.
These movies, we've talked a lot about triple features, and there's always seems to be one that doesn't work out, and one that kind of sticks out as a sore thumb. But and I thought The Shining might be that in this instance, because The Innocents and The Haunting are so similar in tone and feel and visuals. But they're not. They all go together really well. They all share very similar things, especially, the beginning of The Innocents, when we have this interview for the governess position, and it felt like The Shining. It felt like the beginning of The Shining when Jack Torrance is first getting that job. And,
right.
I mean, both of those scenes felt, very, I don't know, creepy on their own, and that's before any of the horror even begins.
Right, and with The Haunting, you've got Eleanor Lance having already been chosen for the job. In other words,
right.
to be a supposed paranormal researcher in Hill House. The Haunting based on
or a
Shirley.
Research subject, I guess.
Research subject, both. They're supposed to be both keeping notes and bringing ghostly effects toward them. But she's already past that stage and is now just battling to be able to get out of her oppressive domestic situation. Her sister and brother-in-law rule her life, and she's just trying to get out of there. So all three characters are starting, when we first see them, on this journey toward a fateful encounter with a building.
Right.
Yeah.
And something new,
or,
right?
or like a building that, I don't know what, like represents their psyche.
Yes.
Or exactly.
Yes.
Or it's sort of brought to life, by them being there.
Right.
And so you have Bly Manor in The Innocents, you have Hill House in The Haunting, and then the Overlook in The Shining, and they're, for the time periods that they take place in, they all work very well. And the way that, the Overlook is kind of this current version of one of these big Gothic homes and these mansions or castles out in the middle of, well, England, I guess. I guess that's where would this take place?
Well, the Haunting, they've located it in New England. When Shirley Jackson wrote the novel, The Haunting of Hill House, she had actually seen a house in California that she thought was a perfectly bad, evil house just on sight. But who thinks of California and haunting? Nobody. So she relocated.
Well, there's the Winchester, right?
That's true. That's true. It's a noble exception. It's not like there aren't places in California.
Yeah.
There absolutely are, but it just doesn't tend to match the landscape in our minds.
Yeah. Or your popular imagination. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So that's New England, and Bly Manor is England, and Overlook is what's supposed to be in Colorado. But outside Denver, outside somewhere.
Denver,
rural.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was 3 hours away from Boulder, apparently.
Or from Boulder.
Made the ride in 3 hours.
And let's start the Jack Nicholson impressions now. For this genre that you love so much, I mean, was this something that kind of started? I mean, the first two movies that we're watching kind of came out of the 60s.
Yeah.
Did it sort of predate that? I mean, I know Gothic horror did, but this type of haunted house story that is sort of exemplified by these three, is that something that was also in existence long before this?
Oh, yeah. It's so old, haunted house accounts. But they I think they hit some sort of peak of popularity, and especially in England, I think in the 1800s, where people are just of Christmas they would sit around and tell ghost story, which isn't a thing. I guess it was Christmas Eve. That's why you feel like Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol as a ghost story.
Sure, right. That's a horror story.
Yeah, ghosts and all that, but it was common as a practice. So it's an old practice, the ghost story, and the Gothic, also goes back it's a architectural and a theatrical and a literary and it's a very broad multi-country phenomena that involves people who become fascinated. If you take the English version, for example, there's a huge fascination that develops with medieval times, Catholicism, so before they ran the Catholics out of England or drove them into hiding. There's a fascination for what's regarded as a brutal, lurid past, but that they long for and are terrified and repulsed by. That's got a kind of return. It comes vomiting up into the contemporary life of, say, 19th century people. So there's always this return of the repressed, whether it's historically, culturally, personally, usually it's some combination. So even if you get to something like The Shining, the history of the hotel is going to be a bad history. It's almost always a bad history of the house and the land and everything else. And it's all going to come percolating up through the unwary lead character who, for some reason, their psychological trouble helps bring it all to the surface.
Activate it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But that part of the idea, unlike maybe, Dracula or one of these, other sort of classic Gothic tales, in these three films, at least this film block, the main character comes in, having been a sort of regular person or, have their own troubles or whatever, but the house kind of becomes something and, brings something out of them. They bring something out of the house. I guess some of that is in Rebecca. I mean, I guess it has been around. It's just like... But in Rebecca, it's like the horror part of it is not really there. It's just, it is in a way. I guess it's a little more subtle, or it's a little subtle. More.
If you go to what is often called the Gothic melodrama, sometimes the Gothic romance, it's a little. It ratchets down the supernatural, usually getting pretty far away from an actual ghost. But the ghostly is, of course, Rebecca, the dead Rebecca, who's, if you're thinking of Hitchcock's, seems to always be haunting the sensibility of the house, the frame. We see her belongings everywhere. The second wife is being tormented by her perfect presence. She was perfectly beautiful and brilliant and witty and wonderful in every way, apparently. And of course, it's very important that you never see her, so she seems to haunt the off-screen space, and you almost expect to see her any second. So that's as close as you get to the ghostly. But it's not that close.
But in these, it's not so much just passed on or passed away humans are haunting a place. It's like the building itself started out this way, and Hill House specifically was said to be built bad, and with like no right angles, all wrong angles, those sorts of things. I thought that was interesting that it's like, well, I mean, I'm going to reference my favorite movie, Ghostbusters here. So, how they talk about how the building is kind of an antenna that channels into the other side. I feel like that's kind of what Hill House was and what, Bly Manor was. Well, maybe.
That's true.
Bly Manor the Innocence is still I'm questioning in my head whether or not any of that it was actually real, if it was actually haunted, if there was any possession or anything like that.
Well, that one takes it the far as this, especially the movie version, into speculation. Is it all the governess's own? She's supposed to be only 20. Deborah Kara's 40, but she's acting her little heart out to be a young, sheltered, untried daughter of a vicar. Has no worldly experience, but has a horror of evil and a determination to fight it. And whether it's her own repression and troubled psyche that is imposing this ghost narrative. And keep in mind too, Shirley Jackson, the author of the novel, thought this is ghosts. I mean, Henry James was initially telling what seemed to be, at least people initially read it from the late 1800s, as a real ghost story. It was a 20th century thing to start thinking, is it? Edmund Wilson, leading light of the literary world, wrote an essay, I think in the 40s or 50s, about the idea that maybe the whole thing is in the head of the governess. And when the writers got a hold of the adaptation job, the first guy to do it was the playwright. He had made a successful play called The Innocents. He came up with the title. And he did it as if the ghosts were just real. It wasn't ambiguous. But then Truman, the director, Jack Clayton, didn't love that version. And he brought Truman Capote, a friend of his, in. And Truman Capote loved the idea of the ambiguity. In fact, if anything, leaning it toward the idea of the governess imposing out of her own troubled and repressed psyche, especially all of her sexual repression, onto these children, these poor hapless children, where no doubt bad things have happened. There are these servants were kind of run amok, apparently. That seems to have been true. But the ghost thing is made very questionable. But that's a recent approach to the story.
I think that frightens me even more than there being real ghosts in the place.
They make it terrifying by the end, because the consequences are so terrible. You got the little girl, Flora, is she having a complete breakdown by the end? She's screaming her head off and has to be taken away out of the house, back to London, I think, somewhere. She got to be taken away. And the boy dies. The boy, Miles, dies, apparently, of heart failure, either from actually seeing the ghost of Peter Quint or not, and just being tormented by the governess to death.
Still questioning that one. That one stuck with me. Of all these three, you know, that was a great ending.
Yeah, it's a very, very disturbing film, and the children are so remarkable in their performances.
Yes.
What's his name? Martin Stevens, who was also in Village of the Damned, is the boy, and Pamela Franklin, who goes on to have a career, that's her first part, is Flora. And they're so beautiful. They're supernaturally beautiful children. And of course, their behavior is way too angelic. And Miles acts like he's way, way older than he is. Like he's a 40-year-old roue who's courting the governess as much as being an angelic child. And so there's all that disturbance of him calling her my dear. Well, the full mouth kiss is probably the biggie. I hope they had a therapist standing by on the set for the kid, you know?
But I thought that the Shining shared that too, having a great kid that was able to deliver that performance. And, you know, I think that's how those two movies, you know, kind of share similar themes.
Well, kind of, but I you know, the Danny Lloyd, or I think that was the actor's name, you know, did a great job in terms of what was being asked of him. I think everyone in The Shining is, you know, acting, you know, off kilter and in this very sort of stylized way. I mean, none of them are acting like humans in any way. Whereas, you know, the Miles in The Innocents is very much human, even though it's kind of uncanny how old he seems to be for being whatever, you know, what was he supposed to be, 9 years old or something?
10,
in this
maybe.
show? Yeah, exactly.
It's hard to tell. Yeah. At least you could. Our sense of children of the 19th century tends to be that they're like little adults. So it seems a little more natural until he starts doing the courtship stuff and saying, I'll protect you, my dear. And then again, the kissing. But so we're more likely to regard that as, that's probably right. They were raised to be very adult. You weren't supposed to cry after you were, I don't know,
interesting.
6, 7 years old. Like, what? A grown-up girl or boy like you? You don't cry anymore. That's all done.
That's baby stuff. Yeah,
that's for babies, exactly. But you're right, with The Shining, you've got this boy who's this odd little gnome who has psychic powers, obviously. And he and his father and his mother don't seem to go together at all. So when they're...
Not at all.
I love the scene where they're pressed into their tiny car and they're driving up the mountain and you're looking at these three people and it's already a disaster. It's already horrifying. Because you're just like, these three people should never have been together. There's no way Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall ever get together. So... and then Kubrick...
It's okay. He saw it on the television.
So you can tell Kubrick not only did this on purpose, cast them that way so they don't seem to belong together, and you know there's going to be nothing but trouble, but then he has them act in completely different registers, notoriously. He has Nicholson acting in this increasingly outrageous, hugely stylized performance, and then he's got Shelley Duvall just striking the same note of weeping hysteria for almost, half the movie. She just has to cry until her face is just a mushy red blob.
We're gonna go to Sidefinder.
So it's all very deliberate to feel like this is already a terrifying disaster before we ever get it.
Go check it out.
That's my favorite Nicholson part, though, when he's at the door and that shot that's looking straight up at him from the check it out. I love that so much.
That's the scene they did 120 times, I think.
Is it really?
Yeah, he made the staircase where she's waving the bat.
Oh no,
that one.
That one. I'm
the one he's talking
conflated
about
too.
is like when it was in the little pantry or whatever. He gets locked.
Oh
in.
yeah.
But that thing on the stairs 120 times.
Over and over. There was some theory of acting he was supposedly working with that. Supposedly.
Torture?
Yeah, it essentially was torture.
Spanish Inquisition?
Yes. Where he was just trying to break, specifically Shelley Duvall, because he felt, I don't know, he couldn't get her weepy and automatic enough. He claimed. It did seem like he was just torturing her. That's the general.
It did, yeah. There's been a lot of behind the scenes videos of that where it's just he's giving her the business. It's just not fun.
No.
But then you're right. Then he would let Nicholson just run around and act, and open up and do his thing, and he was just running around with an axe at some point, getting warmed up for a scene.
Yes.
and he's yelling at Shelley Duvall for walking on taking one step with her left foot versus her right at one point.
Right, exactly.
Jesus.
It was just evil. And then apparently he was actually really mean to Scatman Crothers too, which is awful to hear.
That sucks.
Made him walk from the car in the snow into over and over 45 times. He was an old man by then, and Nicholson finally had to go to him and say, "Man, respect the actor. You must stop."
Really? Nicholson put him in his place, huh?
Yep. It was too.
I guess it seems like he's the only one on set that Kubrick would have listened to.
Was spared. I mean, admittedly, he had to be in the 120 takes with Shelley Duvall. For most of it, anyway.
Just as a quick aside over, it's in thinking of Kubrick movies, it's he didn't often, cast giant stars this late in his career. You know what I mean? It's you get people that aren't huge names or whatever, and maybe precisely so that he can, abuse them into these performances. I don't know. Yeah,
when he works with when he finally gets Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, they basically have to move there and live there for years. For years.
Yeah, a year and a half, 2 years, or whatever.
2 years, I thought it was, where he's just all right, we just live here now and do this now, and that's our life.
Right. Yeah. The movie came out in 99, and then but they started shooting in 96 or something. It was something
insane.
Just insane.
Yes. But they were willing. It was Nicholson was like that too. A worshiper of the great directors, so I think he was willing to just say, "Oh, you tell me what you want, and I'll do it."
Well, but I guess what I meant was just that, there's only so far, whatever. If Nicholson was tired of doing 120 takes, it seems like he has a little more star power to be able to push back or whatever. Whereas, some of these other actors, even though Scatman Crothers had done things before, Shelley Duvall too, they didn't have that same cachet that I know possibly one of the biggest stars in the world, Jack Nicholson, did. Right.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Especially at that time, right?
Yeah.
So let's. I thought this was an interesting point. Mike Flanagan is currently adapting all of these stories, or at least all of them in a way. He's adapted The Haunting with The Haunting of Hill House with that series, which you said you couldn't get through. Is that
I only
right,
watched
Eileen?
the first two. It was too scary. It was even cheesy, but it was still too scary.
It's pretty great.
Really?
Then there's the Haunting of Bly Manor, which is The Innocents, which was Turn of the Screw, the original book.
Yeah.
And then he did Dr. Sleep, which is the sequel to The Shining. And I thought it's interesting that he is taking on all of these, and you could see all the similarities between these, and it was just really cool that this block kind of lined up with what he's doing.
Exactly.
That's SEO, everybody. That is search engine optimization.
Yeah, have you had a chance to look at the Bly Manor? Any of the
not yet. My mom's coming out to visit, and I need to wait for her.
It's interesting because he does an update to present day and then flashback to the 80s. And the clothes are so aggressively 80s that you will be slapped in the eye by every scene. But I won't talk about it because you got to get into it. But he's doing some interesting things. It's very loosely adapted. You are at a kind of Bly Manor place. There is the new governess, the new children, but there's an importing of a lot of new plot that's his.
Right.
So there's more
trying
characters
to expand that story. And that's what he kind of did with The Haunting of Hill House. When after watching The Haunting now for the first time, this is my mom's favorite movie, like of all time. She watched it as a kid, like growing up, and it was just scary as hell to her. Yeah. And she always used to tell me about the rapping on the door and how my grandpa, her dad, used to scare the shit out of her back in the day by knocking on her door like that after she'd watch it. Yeah,
traumatizing.
We're a terrible family. Terrible family.
This is the same mom who would drag you to Creep Show at 3 years old or whatever.
Not drag me, allow me.
Allow you, yeah.
But I thought it was interesting how he changed, because this one is in many ways it's a paranormal investigation, and I thought that was a really interesting story. I think I saw it in Scary Movie 2, though. They did the same thing. This must have been a remake of this.
Yeah, there you go.
But no, I thought that was really cool. But in Mike Flanagan's version, he kind of turns that into more of a family drama. And in that one, Eleanor is part of a bigger family, and everybody that's represented in The Haunting as strangers before they meet each other, they're all family in The Haunting. Right. And he found a way to make that more of a family drama with Eleanor, and Luke is actually a brother, and it's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But speaking of Luke, I thought it was great seeing Russ Tamblyn in the credits, because I'm a huge Twin Peaks fan, and I was so disappointed that he didn't have his 3D glasses on as Dr. Jacoby, because that is one of my favorite characters ever. But he's really good in that movie, and everyone is really good in this movie.
They are. It's a great little mini ensemble. I mean, The Innocents and The Haunting have in common, well, I guess, and Shining, that the number of characters is extremely small, and the whole effect of the thing is riding on a tiny number of characters in an enclosed space, trapped kind of, for a long period. So yeah, apparently Russ Tamblyn initially didn't like the part. He thought he was too much of a jerk, didn't really want to play. Luke is the playboy who said he majored in martinis in college, so they should be pretty good. He's the young hipster.
But I don't drink.
Eleanor, who's had no life, of course refuses to get one, so she doesn't take a drink. But he wound up. The studio leaned on him, and he finally said, "Oh," and then he realized it had great possibilities, and he really makes a lot of the role. He's a lot of the comic relief. He's of course going to be the character who has to be converted from total skepticism,
the non-believer,
to
the skeptic,
the whole place should be burnt down and the ground sowed with salt. So he gets the last line.
Right.
I'll sell it to you cheap, Doc.
Exactly.
I thought it was interesting that, again, this movie kind of toes the line between whether or not this is really happening and whether or not this is all psychological. Is this some sort of mass hysteria between all these people?
Dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. Enough, I get the point.
Eleanor and Theo are technically hearing these sounds or seeing this door being pushed or anything like that. Is that why Luke and Dr. Markway are seeing that as well? And are they really seeing that? And even by the end, when Eleanor takes a spill into the tree and ultimately dies, in a way the house keeping her there, she died because a human being ran in front of her car. It wasn't anything supernatural or anything like that. And so that ending is it's like a rug pull out from under you kind of situation.
Though it does make you speculate whether there was something with her in the car, but she's the one saying, with her hands on the wheel, going, "Stop it, stop it." And you're how much is it her trying to kill herself so she won't have to leave the only home that she's ever embraced, which is Hill House.
She did not want to leave.
Yeah, she just desperately. You don't know in the end. They're speculating, the other characters, whether this isn't the best thing that could have happened to her, which is how sad her life has been.
Right. I know. Well, two things. Like, one, the perspective anyway on the haunting is, the only time we really get outside of that is that very, very ending. Mm-hmm. It's mostly just Eleanor.
It's a lot. We're a lot with Eleanor. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the story. It's like her story. It's like the voiceover and whatever will be coming from her.
And the things in the house that echo other people's experiences are clearly hers. So Abigail, someone who died in the house, died rapping on the wall, while Eleanor's mother died rapping on the wall, and Eleanor didn't come. So Eleanor resembles the companion. There's all these ways of, when she hits that tree in the end, the first Mrs. Crane died when her carriage hit that tree 100 years earlier.
Right.
So there's all these ways that Eleanor is the one who's looped in to the house, who seems always to have been in the house, which is like The Shining in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
She's always been the caretaker.
Exactly.
You see that, like, especially when she's like dancing there at the end, and it's kind of like, talking about, I want to stay here always, or whatever she says.
I've broken the spell of Hill House. She
yeah.
around.
Yeah, exactly. Like she's fully, been absorbed into the mindset of Hill House. But there's also like this question of like, how much of this are we just seeing from her perspective? How much of this is objectively happening? Because some things
the others partake in, which is something that what's his name? John the main scientist keeps arguing.
Right. Mm-hmm. But I would also argue that like the film presents all that from Eleanor's perspective.
Largely from her perspective.
And so it's like you, as the audience, are also seeing John through sort of her lens.
Yeah, she's in love with Dr. Markway John.
Right.
Theo is after her. Theo is a lesbian, a very daring for 1963.
Yeah.
Lesbian, very fashionable and hot. The hottest figure in the film, for sure.
Yeah,
Played by Claire
super
Bloom.
Fashionable.
So there's all of this sexual threat stuff sort of playing around Eleanor's very, very sheltered life. So again, that Gothic heroine thing, both she and Miss Giddens, the governess in The Innocents, they're both typical Gothic heroines. They're sheltered people who get out into the world in unfortunate circumstances or in weird circumstances and wind up being up against all these tests, all these that form a kind of coming of age arc, however belatedly. I mean, Eleanor is 30 something, but she's never had any life, so she's kind of.
She literally has nothing, right? And she even lies about it. Says she has a little apartment where all of her things are and everything, but that doesn't exist.
Yes,
that was very sad.
I mean, that part too, like, really kind of binds all these movies in a way where it's like maybe Eleanor is sort of the most down and out of them, but the Torrances are too. It's like it's in the movie, it's like hinted at, and not quite as explicit as it is in the book, but like. This is Jack's last chance or whatever. He's been kicked out of his teaching job. We don't know why in the film.
But we know he has a drinking problem.
Yeah, you kind of like assume it has something to do with that. Mm-hmm. And, there's sort of this desperation. And like, when Wendy first implores him to leave, he's like, I can't. I want to shovel sidewalks and blah, blah, blah. So there's this whole thing of, it's a class thing, but also these extremely, extremely desperate people being led into this situation and then finding that this is their, or believing anyway, that this is their salvation and that this house, the hotel, is somehow, their life's calling in a way. Mm-hmm. Even in a way, the Innocence is kind of in that realm. It's like maybe not quite as desperate,
right?
The Deborah Kerr character, but but she, has kind of humble circumstances and, as part of the help there and everything else.
Yeah, no, there's a scene where the children ask her, well, ask about where she lived, and she talks about being in her father's, vicarage, and that with all the other kids in the family, there was no room, and they said, no room to have secrets, and she said, no, not for long, there's no privacy. Right. And of course, privacy is exactly what this vast estate has sort of had, enough that we don't know what the children have been up to with the former governess, Miss Jessel, with Peter Quint, who are now both deceased, but were having a wild sadomasochistic affair that was exhibitionist in nature, all over the place.
A lot hinted at there in those discussions with Mrs. Gross.
Yes.
The current, she was just did not want to tell that story and did not want to tell the truth about this, but there was a lot going on behind closed doors that people shouldn't know about.
Right.
And should know about.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah, she says something like rooms used like the dark forest, which I don't even know how much that would play to people now. Like, what? But yeah, that would have been clear even to early 60s audiences. Oh, they're having sex all over the house and maybe the grounds. And the children, the implication are at least seeing it. Mm-hmm. The terrible implication is they're part of it.
Right.
And that the ghosts might be trying to possess the children so they can continue their physical relationships. So now you've had pedophilia. Now you're adding incest.
Yeah.
Fitzmiles and Flora. So the mind reels as you're now as you're trying to get your head around the shocking story that Henry James writes. I forget what year in the I think 1880 something. That he based on a rumor, on a shocking story a friend of his who was a bishop told him, and said, "Oh yeah, there was an aristocratic manor. The children of the house were left in the care of servants, but none of the family were there paying any attention, and ... bad things were happening." And that's where Henry James got the idea for the story.
Wow.
Yeah.
Brutal.
Well, and all three of them kind of like have this, how do you put it? Like the sort of like a uncanny view of sex, or like a very repressed and ugly view of like sex. Now, in the innocence, like, of course, like what that has to do with was kind of like, as you're outlining, pretty traumatizing events and like, terrible things that may have occurred in the house, but also just the amount of sexual tension between the, like you said, 40-year-old Deborah Kerr and the possibly 9-year-old kid.
And the ghost of Peter Quint that only she sees, but he's carefully cast to be this kind of, you could see how it would be a Gothic heroine fantasy. They often wind up, obsessed with some Byronic figure, some wild, dark man who broods and hangs around and is sexually, what's the line about Byron? He's mad, bad, and dangerous to know. That's the guy. So every time he looms up, you can read it as a sexual fantasy of hers.
Wow.
I know. It just goes on and on.
Yeah. But and then just to finish that thought, it's like you're saying, like The Haunting explored that with the Eleanor's sort of sexual repressions, and even The Shining touched on it with like the very queasy, sexualized woman in the bathtub. Like the beautiful woman steps out of it, and he's kind of enthralled, but his reaction is very like sort of dulled and weird. And the music is just like really, really intense, and like and the whole thing is just kind of tilting you off kilter, as you're watching it and giving you that stomach churning feeling.
Yeah, and when the house finally breaks loose at the very end, and you start to see, at least Wendy, played by Shelley Duvall, starts seeing ghosts in every room.
Everywhere.
The first ghosts she sees are. One guy's a furry, which I don't think they even knew that term then, and the other guy's in a tuxedo, and they're caught in the middle of a sex act in a bedroom with an open door.
That shot's always scared the hell out of me.
So freaky.
That zoom, Jesus.
You're just not expecting.
Right. No.
And the movie like doesn't make any attempt to explain it whatsoever, and it just is there.
Yeah.
That dog character and the guy in the tuxedo were characters in the book, kind of minor characters. There's this whole thing about when they're exploring the past in the book, it's like Jack becomes obsessed with the history of the hotel, becomes, digging through these news clippings or whatever, and like it also kind of wraps its tendrils around him in that sense, the hotel does. And, the guy throwing the 20s soiree that we kind of see in the movie The Shining, was the guy in the tuxedo, and his sex pet, the guy in the dog costume, what was just his like sex slave.
Yeah.
But the movie doesn't make anything of it. It's just like here's something kind of like an off-putting image.
Well, and
it worked.
It kind of ties in with the bad history of the hotel, where it's an ultra luxury hotel built on a quote unquote Indian burial ground. So you got layers of by like a robber baron who's planting his money somewhere. So there is all this suggestion of white decadence that's been piled on the bones of the dead underneath it. But obsessive get really, if you've ever seen the documentary Room 237, it's all about, I think, 4 or 5 people who have seen the movie 9 billion times and obsess over certain aspects of it. And the first one, I believe, that is in the documentary is obsessed with the whole Indian burial ground aspect. And he's like, did you see the baking powder in that storage area? There's all these faces of Indian chiefs, and they literally go through the movie, each of them with a fine-tooth comb, finding all of their obsessive points. And it's like, yeah, they're there, but they're not pushed forward to any great degree. It's left pretty ambiguous.
Right, you're bringing a lot to that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so these are definitely obsessed people who are bringing wild things. Like that's where you get the rundown on how Stanley Kubrick supposedly faked the moon landing. And there's clues.
The Apollo sweater.
The Apollo sweater. All that. It's all in that documentary.
Right. What's funny is like just as another total aside, but like. The Shining, written by Stephen King, it comes out in the 70s. I think it was like his 3rd book that came out. Another book that he had written around the same time but didn't get published till later. And he only apparently later said he published it to get out of his contract with this publisher and so he can move on to the next one. The other book I'm talking about is Pet Sematary. Both of them are kind of written in and have this very similar feel to them. It's like Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. They're both kind of the same story, but like in Pet Sematary, it kind of focuses on the Indian burial ground aspect of it. Whereas, in the book, that's not even a thing. That was something that Kubrick brought to it.
Yeah. It's common just for it to have one mention. If you ever see Poltergeist, it also it's whatever the national guilt is.
You took the gravestones, but you didn't take the bodies. You took the stones.
Right. Oh, I forgot even about all that. Yeah, they do pay it up.
Well, that one, I think that this. I mean, we've definitely mentioned that this is Kubrick's Shining, his version of The Shining, as opposed to Stephen King's version.
Yes, which can be seen if you really want to. The miniseries is there to be viewed.
Yeah,
that's a bit long, and it's
Yikes. Yeah,
not very good.
And it still doesn't drill down into what kind of makes the book so good. But I guess it spends more time with Jack being a human as opposed to just being a very bizarre caricature by Tuesday he's already if you hear me typing I forgot that fuck in it's like he's already just completely nuts.
That's so delightful
from the get-go.
It is awesome.
Again, nothing that resembling a human at all, but like fascinating and entertaining to watch.
Well, yeah, and King had a huge investment in the idea of that character redeeming himself by saving his son and helping to destroy the hotel, basically, and going and dying in the act. And I guess
instead of just freezing in the middle of the snow
while trying to kill your son. Stephen King was not
cross-eyed, frozen.
Those Kubrick looks in those movies, and they just kind of stare at the camera.
With the eyes cast slightly up. And there is that great match cut where he's looking at the what do you call it? The
topiary? Or the maze?
The maze, the version of it that's the desktop one, and then they match the shot to them out.
Very cool.
Very, very cool shot, yeah.
But I think in the book, those were actually like animals that came to life, right? Like topiary animals.
Hedge animals,
Yeah, it was a topiary,
I thought that was actually a good solution for a movie version of that, to put a crazy maze that did get paid off at the end,
Right.
at least in this version of the story.
Right.
I wanted to talk about when we were talking about Room 237. In Room 237, it ends up at like the 57 mark of this movie, which is kind of like we were talking about how that when movies take those sharp turns or when they get ramped up at that like halfway mark. And right then, when 237 happens, when Danny goes in there, he comes out, tells his mom about it, and then Jack goes in to check it out. That's when he meets the beautiful woman who then turns out to be that one.
Right.
But at that point, like all hell is absolutely breaking loose in the house, and I thought it was like a really sharp divide because it's. He goes in, he sees the woman, Jack obviously sees it, and the kid is just sitting there with that, like, the spittle coming out of his mouth.
Yeah.
But I think that's when everything happens. I think that's like leading into, that big shot of, red rum written on the door when Danny is walking in a hypnotic state or whatever it is. Shelley Duvall finally sees that in the mirror over his shoulder, that crash zoom, and then we're right into that whip pan of the axe through the door. This movie rocks on its own. Like, I'm okay with it not being as, like, strict to the book or anything, but this movie just rocks.
It really does. And from the beginning, part of the reason I think Kubrick has to go big fairly early is he starts so big. That wonderful shot of them driving up into the mountains and the music, the synth music is booming and killing you already, and you're terrified. And you're like, why am I terrified? Is this highway haunted? What is happening? You're not even at the hotel.
Nothing is normal to another movie. Like the strange text coming up on screen, the blue that they chose. Like, where have you ever seen a baby blue
credits
text
going backwards? Right, exactly. The crazy, like, off-kilter music. But, I mean, almost immediately, like, we meet Danny, and then he has perhaps epileptic episode or something where he sees that elevator of blood. Yeah. And, so it's like, it doesn't, like, actually wait till the 50-minute mark for the horror, but I know what you're saying, Brian, that it like it just it
unleashes
goes
in a big
full
way.
bore. Yeah, exactly. It cranks up to 11 then. Yeah,
but it's very bad to start. It's already so bad.
Yeah, exactly. It's already like horrifying, from whatever that is, minute 3 or whatever, or even it's like the opening scene, like you're saying, like the crazy flyover the Rocky Mountains there. Yeah, and it's like in the movie version of The Shining, it creates this like state of mind while watching it. You're not watching it the way you'd watch with like getting invested in the characters and sort of what they want and what they're up to or whatever. But moreover, you're kind of becoming part of what the characters are going through there, which is like this like madness of this hotel and like in the constant like disorientation. I mean, like that is part of it where it's like. Yeah, I guess in this adaptation, okay, you only have 2 hours, or in this case, 2 hours and 2.5 hours, however long this movie is, to get through this like 700-page book, and so you start like picking and choosing what you can do, what you can focus on, but I don't know that was necessarily what Kubrick was up to, but more so kind of taking. This thing and making it very Kubrickian and making it very, kind of heady, but also the atmosphere is the point of it, rather than, like I said, kind of following these characters or believing their performances or whatever it is. It's more about you just keep getting this atmosphere, these feelings that like all those like really slow zooms in and out of things. The
one pulling back from the TV is my favorite because they're just Wendy and Danny watching TV.
right.
And you're like,
yeah, exactly.
But you just feel like something awful's going to happen. And of course it always is going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Or like after Danny has, gone full Tony or whatever, and we don't see the TV, but we keep hearing like the Roadrunner song in the background, and it's like such a crazy like nails on a chalkboard juxtaposition of like the horrors that these people are feeling, and like the comfort of a Saturday morning cartoon. But yeah, like that shot you're talking about with watching the TV and it being kind of horrifying in and of itself, kind of is another thing maybe that the Poltergeist world was referencing, not only the burial ground thing that we were talking about earlier, but like just the whole
right.
TV aspect of it, and like how the family was sort of mesmerized by this TV, and the TVs is always playing and just doing random stuff. Wendy's has that gigantic like 40-gallon drum of
Fruit cocktail?
the fruit cocktail or whatever.
Look gross.
They're watching TV there. We see Halloran in Florida, having an epileptic episode himself, just kind of like staring off in the distance.
Right.
But he's watching the news, and
He's got quite an interesting looking apartment.
He
too. His,
He's a player.
his artwork, exactly. Yeah,
I want
a lot of
those
suggesting.
paintings,
Yeah,
exactly.
those are some amazing paintings. Whole other side of Halloran.
Right. It gives this whole other side to him, right? Like he's such a sweet guy to Danny, and then all of a sudden you see him in this apartment, and then there's one behind him, and then one on the other side. They do the reverse.
Yeah,
He's just surrounded by sex.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's no wonder they got Melvin Van Peebles to play him in the next one.
Did they?
Yeah.
That's so
Anyway.
But it's important to note too that Kubrick is doing his usual adventurous stuff with technique and style, and so he's doing very pioneering use of Steadicam. So the famous shots, both following Danny on his big wheel or preceding him, so you get that kind of disembodied, floating,
ghostly feeling that you can get with the Steadicam, because it's not handheld and it's not on a dolly, and you can't quite figure out. You can't, especially then. It was such a huge impact because you're like, how are they getting that?
You can't get your sea legs
Right.
while you're watching it. Yeah, exactly.
I think all of these movies consistently were helped by great cinematography.
Yes.
I think that's what made these movies fantastic.
The Innocents, in particular.
Exactly.
The look of
Beautiful.
that is just amazing. I mean, I guess all three of them for sure, but that one, I'd never seen The Innocents before, and like that, it really struck me how sort of beautiful it looked. And
some in particular were it was horror during the day, and you're outside and you see a beautiful lake, and it's a wide shot, and there's a figure of a woman there.
Right.
And it was one of the most terrifying things I'd ever seen, but it was just a shot of a woman, in a wide shot, but it was so well done because there were moments of the close-ups, like when Quint's face would pop up into the window, and there were some moments like that, but really the horror was from a long way away, a distance, the man at the top of the tower and all that. It wasn't right in your face, and I thought that's what was so creepy about it.
Yeah, there's consistent great use of deep focus, which is a big challenge. They're using that wide screen, which is hard to compose for.
Right?
CinemaScope, which was mandated. The director, Jack Clayton, wasn't happy, but the cinematographer, Freddie Francis, said it'll be okay. I know how to compose for it. You have to have, we're going to have all this statuary and creepy vases and roses and everything. We'll have things way up close and things happening way in the background, and it'll make people paranoid and want to study the frame and what's going to come into it. There's that wonderful shot of Flora, played by Pamela Franklin, and way close up going, "Oh, look, there's a lovely spider eating a butterfly."
Yeah.
And she's up here
scary.
in your face, and back there is, Miss Giddens looking horrified, and all the usual urns and pots all through these gardens. And there's this feeling of that there's too much, your eyes can't get hold of everything that you need to. You find yourself hunting through these very complicated...
The statues missing hands. And
exactly,
just
that wonderful scene in the garden, which we should talk about. It's so subtle, but such a great example of what you can get in this type of horror. All of this making use of what can you do with the camera that seems so ghostly and paranormal. So when she's just cutting roses in the garden, doing a very ladylike thing of the day, and she parts the roses and looks through, and there's this horrible little statue of a child with holding larger hands of an adult that are broken off at the wrists, and out of the mouth of the child comes this disgusting beetle that hangs on its lip for a second in slow-mo and then drops, and it's this kind of horrifying, sexualized, surreal Salvador Dali nightmare image.
It makes your skin crawl. Like
Yes.
Even though, like, yeah, I guess technically, intellectually, what you're seeing isn't that, it's like, okay, whatever, you're in the garden, there's going to be bugs.
Yeah, there's bugs, exactly.
Yeah.
But it seems significant, just the way it's done. And then, of course, that's when she wheels around and sees the man, Peter Quint, she later decides, up on but the sun is in her eyes, so she's kind of covering. There's all of this interference with what you can ever see. They do wonderful shots, like when you do see the ghost, Miss Jessel, the ghost governess, across the lake. They made it a kind of composite shot and deliberately muddied the image of her, so she looked like she was in a slightly other realm than Miss Giddens and Flora, who are in the foreground.
You have to see her. She's there.
Yeah,
you have
she's
to see
there,
her.
and the kids shrieking, "I don't see her! She's dead!" And we get to decide: does Flora see her, and it's all conspiracy, or is the governess driving this poor child mad with terror, saying, "There's your dead governess." You have to say so.
And speaking of driving with terror, like, what do you make of the ending with the kid? You know, was Miles driven to die of fright, or you know,
was he strangled? Did she poison him? Like, what is it? You know, like,
it looks like she dies of fright either way, but it's either.
Yeah, I was kind of like, did Quint leave his body? Is that why he finally died? And,
does she exorcise Quint? Quint has had possession of him, and he goes, and that kills him.
And yeah, exactly. Like, being exorcised in this world is to die. Like, you know, like,
like, oh, now I'm better.
The spirit leaves the body, but
yes,
there's only room for one in there. So
the only option.
Yes,
that body's done.
Yes, it's either that or she literally frightens him to death by doing the same thing. You see him, you've got to say you see him. There he is, and he's like, where? Yeah. And then post-death, she plants a gigantic kiss on his mouth.
Oh, right.
Yes, right. Yeah, right. The kiss in the, like, greenhouse or whatever that was the one I was thinking of. But you're right. There's also
two.
The kiss of
he kisses her first.
When he's dead. Right.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. How intense was that greenhouse scene too? Where it's like, and I love. You know, speaking of cinematography again, like, you know, you're further away from the characters, but you can definitely see every pore
and beads of sweat all starting
beads
to
of
form.
sweat like running down their face as they're, like, you know, melting in this room, and like as the scene kind of, like, you know, whips up to a fever pitch of, like, tell me you're doing this conspiracy, tell me, you know, and all these things. As the audience, your kind of palms are starting to get clammy just watching this thing, you know.
Yeah.
I didn't know what was going to happen at the end of the end. I didn't know where it was going, and I had many different thoughts going on at once, and I was like, yeah, the kids are totally possessed. Yeah, this kid is totally some jerk that, you know, at one point was in the house. Yeah, he's possessed.
Right.
Especially because we've been watching, like, Possession and things like that in the last couple episodes. I've been cutting one of our episodes, and now every movie I watch now is this big psychological horror, even if it's like a comedy. You know, I'm like, when's he gonna go feed that to some demon in the room now?
Well, you know, and it's interesting to go back to the original novella, because now you go back and you read it, and you're like, no, Henry James was making it ambiguous. There's just as much evidence that it's the governess as that there are real ghosts. So I think we went.
Now you said that Shirley Jackson said it was the ghost.
She insisted
officially.
She had always meant it was the ghosts, and Robert Wise had gone to see her to say, "Do you mind if we angle it in that same direction so that it can be read as a more psychological thing that's afflicting Eleanor?" And she said, "Sure, that sounds like a great idea," but that's not what she meant. Shirley Jackson believed she was a witch. She was way into the paranormal. If you see the new version of her, something like her life, a loose version of a set of episodes in her life starring Elizabeth Moss, they bring that out, that she thinks she's a witch and may even have witchy powers. And
really?
Yeah. She certainly believes she did. Yeah.
But the turn of the screw, that was still a little bit more ambiguous, or on the ambiguous side.
It wasn't regarded as such. Initially, it seemed to have been regarded as a pure ghost story. And then it was like mid-20th century with Edmund Wilson, and certainly that you start getting this new idea of, like, I think it could easily be the governess's own, you know, in her own head. But if you actually go back to the text with contemporary eyes, you're like, well, it looks like Henry James played it down the middle. You know, there's all this Mrs. Gross saying she never saw anything. So there's like no one to back up the governess's
right.
view of what has happened.
No one. She's all alone
She's
in
all
that
alone.
situation, or all alone in that idea.
Yeah.
Well, and that kind of like, I think it is a better way to ask the question I was kind of fumbling to ask earlier, which is that like with all three of these in particular, you have the main character, and it's like, the house or the hotel in the case of The Shining, sort of takes on these things that are inside them. Is this their own psyche being sort of personified? Are these things really happening? All those kinds of like questions I think run throughout all three of these films. Are there other things that are in this genre? Like if we're talking about like this sort of subgenre of Gothic horror,
right?
Not Edgar Allan Poe, not Dracula or whatever. This type of like psychological horror. The house is a character. The psychology kind of leads you to believe that maybe it's ambiguous. Is this actually happening as a ghost? You know what I mean? It's like, part of it is maybe repulsion kind of fits in that a little bit. But in that one, I feel like it's a little more objective in the sense that like, yes, this is just something happening in her head.
Right.
Whereas these ones, you can kind of read it either way. And that really long-winded question was like, basically like, what else is in this like sort of subgenre?
Well, I mean, I tend to associate it with Val Lewton films of the 1940s when he he's making low budget horror films. He's trying to find a way to express his own ambitions. He was nominally the producer, but he also he always had the final draft of scripts and didn't take credit. So he technically wasn't directing, but there's a remarkably uniform vision in Cat People and I Walk with a Zombie and Leopard Man and all of his films.
He's the producer the way that Ethan Cohen is the producer. Yeah.
So at any rate, he pioneered something that was called sometimes fear by suggestion. It was this subtle form of horror and it was practical. You didn't have to show monsters that you couldn't afford to create.
Right.
So Cat People, the idea is they wanted you to never see the cats. Unfortunately, very late in the movie, there's like one shot of the cat that got imposed on it. But their whole idea was you should always be torn between, is this woman just who believes she's descended from a race of Siberian cat women and has to fight off the evil from taking over? Or so is it her in her mind or in her sexual disturbance? Or is it really she is? She turns into a cat when she's aroused in any way.
And that's Cat People?
That's Cat People. So
that sounds like an awesome movie.
It's so good.
Yeah.
And it really tries to split exactly down the middle and make it kind of undecidable, but he also wants to make it modern. He deliberately wants to say no more of the Transylvanian castles. We're doing modern America, people who have jobs, people who are leading ordinary lives, and then there's this infusion of supernatural terror that we consider old-fashioned.
That interrupts those lives. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or
can be read.
That was definitely one of those things that, exactly. or maybe it doesn't. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it is a way to recover ghost stories and horror for a more skeptical age. It's an obvious move to make for people who can no longer have a kind of faith in the great age of spiritualism and stuff. A lot of people were really seriously believing in ghosts. It was easier perhaps to sell ghostly tales than
the age of innocence is actually just the age of ignorance. It's like, whereas like, now, we understand everything. All these things make sense, whatever. But like, we're trying to push the boundaries of like those things being able to exist, even in our, we've seen it all in this modern world, the ghosts don't work and don't exist type world. And I know Stephen King is definitely a member of that school where it's like, you'll be following a certain plot and then dive into the horror. And then specifically the Gothic part of it is like, that's very much what Salem's Lot was, which is the book he wrote right before The Shining. The Shining itself, same deal, where it's like taking the castle of Frankenstein or, Dracula or whatever else and kind of being able to put those things into a setting that could scare people because it's something that they're familiar with.
Right, right. And it erupts here.
Like any hotel.
Yeah, any hotel. It's a good...
Any hotel that I go visit.
Right.
Yeah.
Or any giant manor that I've been visiting in the last few years.
A good example of a reasonably contemporary attempt to revive the ghost is Paranormal Activity. And I remember seeing the first one. And of course, again, it's that scientific approach. There's stuff happening in this house, so they start wiring it all up to record everything. Sound, visuals, everything. We're going to be able to figure out what this is. And, the complaint was for people who didn't like it that I like nothing happened. Somebody was like, I remember someone saying, it's supposed to be a big deal when you see on the camera that's been recording everything down the hall that a door opens 6 inches. And I'm like, no, that was great. Because I love ghost stuff. So the door opens 6 inches is like, wow. But for a lot of people, that's not so much.
Well, I mean, I think that people watching these movies now would probably say a very similar thing. The Innocents, not a lot happens, In The Haunting, not a lot happens. I mean, there are really cool scenes, but it doesn't really end with some big fight against a monster or the ghosts are out and they're trying to trap them or put them back wherever they came from. Yeah. It's not that at all, and that's... I don't think that's, that would fit within these stories. I mean, The Shining is probably the most like that.
Yeah.
There's a big...
Although, the Haunting does do that. I mean, like some of the stuff with, like, the wobbly door or whatever, that's like kind of like breaking down or, kind of almost rubbery, like that Sam Raimi, shaky cam shot that, like, zooms in to the door. The giant jump scare. In
opening the trap door and
with the trap door.
But again, that ended up being that was a human being again.
Sure.
Right?
Terrified.
Like that
looks scary because she's terrified.
But in The Shining, we've got full rooms full of skeletons with the the server holding the advocat in his plate. With the
great party, isn't it? Yeah, exactly.
That'll stain, sir.
And you can see what the distance is from early 60s to 80, when in 80, it already does seem like, you gotta have more payoff than...
Right.
I even remember people saying, again, about Blair Witch, that there wasn't enough. And I was like, there wasn't enough. There was so much
I love that
for
movie.
a ghost movie.
Yeah.
I love
exactly.
Blair Witch. I was thrilled.
That was the one I was hoping you'd bring up in terms of like the more modern nothing happens in a movie, but I guess it is a little less modern than
and it doesn't get explained fully. There you just end with the camera.
It ends with
toppling.
someone
somebody's in a corner,
stuck in the corner. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
I thought that was
terrifying.
an effective shot. Yeah, it scared the hell out of me.
Exactly.
Because they told the story before the kids, and he was doing the same thing that the kids were doing. I was like, that was scary.
Well, and just sort of like that stone statue of the child with a beetle in its mouth or whatever. It's like just saying it, or okay, so what? Like, but it's done so effectively in the movie that like it is terrifying when you get there.
No, because again, you have to be able to handle atmosphere and to feel the impact, and the psychological impact is important because you can be we are fragile psychologically. So you can be worked on mentally, either to become a killer if you're Jack Torrance, or be driven mad and you kill someone else, Miles.
Or Miss Giddens, perhaps.
Right.
Yeah.
So the consequences that we can accept from a more skeptical framework, that at the very least you could be driven mad by these ambiguous, quiet events that are nevertheless insidious and suggest so much more than they actually ever say, and that just drives some people crazy. They want it literally established, and someone explaining, like at the end of Psycho, it was the mother that did it. That's
the
crazy
full explanation.
Yeah,
which
look, I'll defend the Psycho ending on this show. I love it. But speaking of Psycho, I actually like The Haunting. I guess it came out after Psycho, but the very beginning of The Haunting felt so
it's very
much
Psycho-ish.
like the beginning of Psycho. It's like when she's like driving the car, she's like hearing the sort of echoey voiceover, and
it's just on her face as she's like driving to a "Where am I going?"
Yeah, and she's like the black sheep sister of the
trying
family.
to get away.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. There's two sisters, and one is established in life, and one is the sister that is cast out into the world, and it's not going to go well for her.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it doesn't.
And it
It's
definitely
very
doesn't.
unfortunate
And,
for her.
that great moment where she first sees the house and she knows.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
Right.
get away. You're being given a last chance. And then she, of course, says, but you've got nowhere else to go.
I know. Yeah, exactly. Like her level of desperation, I guess, was a little more than perhaps even the Marion character.
Marion, who doesn't know. She gets to the
Yeah.
hotel and is like, okay.
Yeah, she doesn't react to the the crazy Gothic house at the top of the hill.
Or the guy saying increasingly bizarre things, and she's just like, meh. All right.
Yeah.
You eat like a bird.
Yeah. A boy's best friend is his mother. Yeah.
Was there anything you wanted to, say about like Gothic horror in general, or anything that you wanted to get out in one good block of about the genre itself, or is there anything?
It just, again, I would underscore, I mean, there are essays, if you get into film studies, that talk about how cinema is uniquely suited to do certain types of horror. It can achieve uncanny effects so well that it seems as if we should make greater use of what the camera can do, what editing can do, what lighting can do. All of these things have so much power to do exactly the kind of films I'm talking about. That I find a lot of horror unsatisfying when it's just relying on what's in front of the screen in this very, very literal way. And I'm like, but you're not even using the apparatus that you have that can do so much that's ghostly and creepy and insidious and scary, but in a quieter way.
Right.
That's why I think I have such an allegiance to this form. It tends more than others to try to use those kind of in-camera effects or all the kind of techniques you can use filmically. Just more than a lot of others. And I love zombie films. I love lots of other kinds of films. But it just seems like the ghostly is especially because it's so ephemeral. You can find ways to use the apparatus inventively, and it seems to encourage people to do it. So that's my big pitch for why this is a cool form.
It's almost like the fear of the unknown and the unseen is really what makes it a bigger scare,
Right.
a bigger
And
horror.
that you have to find a way to convey what is only ambiguously seen, sometimes isn't ever fully seen. And that drives you
like
toward...
madness. You can't really show madness.
Exactly.
I mean, you can show someone going crazy, but what does that really mean visually or things like that?
What does that mean subjectively, right? It's what the main character in Repulsion kind of goes through. It's what the main characters, I guess, in all three of these movies kind of go through. But I guess it's like, when you're talking about horror in general, and it's funny, doing this show, so Brian is a certified, horror buff. And I think, horror kind of like bisects into two broad categories and then has multiple categories out of that. One is movies that are trying to scare you, which is kind of what you're talking about. And then movies that are like, I don't know what, playing on the fun of like the thrills of jump scares and like, ooh, isn't that fun that what we were able to accomplish with gore? But yeah, in the category of like movies that are trying to scare you
in a way that's truly disturbing and hard to identify. Yeah. I
happen to agree that like I think these ghost movies. Also, a couple episodes ago, we did Repulsion, Possession, and Enemy, the Denis Villeneuve movie. And all three of those were kind of like these horror movies, but ones that really stick with you in the sense that like it kind of gets you into a mindset that's off kilter, and like kind of like you're saying, like it plays on the fragility of our soft human minds.
You can take a little detour into like Polanski if you like the movie The Tenant and see the ways he's using the creepy things you can do with cinematic technique, because it's
Shirley
again,
Winter's character.
I know. And there's so many effects that are so disturbing, like him looking out his window at that weird little window that he can see into, and that he sees sort of disturbing people standing there. And you're just like, why is that so terrifying? I mean, there's so many things, like just seeing the woman across the lake. You're right, that scarred me for life. I saw that as a little kid on TV. I've never gotten over it. Still, if I'm feeling nervous at night, I'll see it.
Yeah.
Right.
I also, from The Haunting, I can't have either of my hands uncovered because of the scene where Eleanor's hand is sticking out and something takes her hand in the dark and she thinks it's Theo. And then when the lights come up,
She was over there the whole time?
she's like, yes, whose hand was I holding? And it doesn't matter how absurd.
Your hands have to be under the covers
My
in
hands
bed,
have
you
to
mean?
be under something.
Yeah.
Because I saw them so young, they ran them on TV all the time. So they just marked me.
Yeah.
I think that right there is the equation for the successful movie,
Absolutely.
right? If it's stuck with you that long,
That
I mean,
long.
that's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. I actually was scared for a long time of sort of showers and like in particular bathtub showers, like in The Shining.
In The Shining, yeah.
You know, it actually, yeah, exactly. It had that effect.
I was scared of giant orange bathrooms.
I've never showered since, so.
He at least did color choices for bathrooms so that you could never run into that violent green or the insane red of the two bathroom scenes. You're just never going to... But if I ever did walk into it, I'd be like, I'm out of here. No way.
It's a clear signal to leave. Yeah, exactly.
Leave now.
Toxic sludge green or,
or screaming neon
3M stage blood.
3M
red,
stage blood red. There you go.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to plug, or anything you'd like to promote?
Sure. I'll just mention that I'm a film critic for Jacobin Magazine. I'm writing a lot for them now. I've just been commissioned to double, triple, whatever my output.
Oh no!
So, I know, it's insane. I'm writing a ton.
So this is your last free moment for the rest of your life, apparently.
Pretty much, I'm on a permanent treadmill now, like Jack Torrance.
Oh God, I was just gonna say that, in the very beginning of the movie, he's like, "I was a school teacher and now I'm a full-time writer." Like, oh, I wonder if Eileen is, feeling a kinship.
I can identify.
Let's go see those eyebrows go up real quick.
Yeah, I really identify. And I also have my own podcast. It's called Filmsuck. This coming week, we are going to grapple with the Sofia Coppola problem and her new film called On the Rocks, which seems to be a return.
Oh, I thought you were doing Godfather 3.
I still haven't seen Godfather 3.
Oh,
and thank
really?
God. Yeah.
Wow.
Thank Godfather.
Yeah.
I've never seen that one,
Wow, it's harrowing. If you were a Coppola fan and a fan of the first two, you're just like going, what are you doing?
That's probably why I haven't
Coppola
watched
in
it
the
yet.
70s. Yeah, exactly.
Rough.
So, Filmsuck is the name of your
Filmsuck
podcast?
is the podcast name. Yes. Patrick.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And it's been so fun and delightful to talk to you guys.
Thank you so much for introducing us to these films and setting up this block. We watched The Innocents, The Haunting, and The Shining, and it was just amazing to watch them back to back to back. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and thanks again, Eileen. I'm glad we finally got you on, and we'll definitely have to have you back for some Val Lewton stuff whenever Jacobin doesn't need you to keep
by slaving away. Yeah, that sounds
making
wonderful.
Eileen a dull boy.
Exactly. Definitely a dull boy. There's going to be further transformation.
Right on that note.
So next week, Jeremy and I are going to be looking at the films of Prince. We're going to be checking out Purple Rain, Under the Cherry Moon, and Graffiti Bridge. This is going to be an exciting one. I've never seen any of these movies.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen Purple Rain, and yeah, I've never seen the other two either. But we'll have some help, as we'll have a couple ethnomusicologists, one a good buddy of mine, to take us through and let us know what these movies are and what they have to offer.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for listening. Please make sure to subscribe and follow us on all the podcasts and social platforms at the Grindhouse Institute. And if you really want to give us a boost, check us out on Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. It helps us to get noticed. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll be back next week.
Ciao.
Here's to 5 miserable months on the wagon and all the irreparable harm that it's caused me.